Hello. So good morning. My name is Renee Williams, and I am the project director of the Recruitment Training and Support Center. We're one of the programs under the Special Ed Surrogate Parent Program. As our name indicates, our role is to recruit volunteers. So on that note, if there's anyone who's attending today or who will be listening to the recording, if you're interested in becoming a special education decision maker for eligible student in DCF, then please reach out to us. You can contact us. You go right to our website, which is RTSC. Our email address is rtsc@fcsn.org, and your website is www.fcsn.org and /RTSC. So please reach out if you're interested in learning more about the program or if you're interested in being a volunteer. We also, if you're an existing SESP, we provide a lot of information, resources, and support for you. So please reach out to us. We're thankfully fully staffed now. We have 3 training specialists and support specialists available to answer your calls and support you with your student. So please stay in touch if you have any questions. The program, there's 2 programs that run the Special Ed Surrogate Parent Program. So I'd like to introduce you to Megan Ronzio. She is also a director of the program, and Megan will tell you a little bit about what her side of the program does, and then introduce our speaker. I do want to let you know that today's webinar is being recorded. And so you'll be able to find a copy of the recording on our archive webinar page. There's also opportunity to submit your questions, so please use the Q&A icon on the bottom of your screen and submit any questions you may have. We are going to present those questions after Jim has presented his presentation. So any questions you have, please feel free to submit them. So with that being said, Megan, welcome.
Hi, thanks, Renee. And thank you for all of you for attending. It's great to see you all, even though it is virtually. My name is Megan Ronzio. I'm the program director with the Special Education Surrogate Parent Program. As Renee said, we're the partner program to the RTSC at the Federation. And I would like to introduce Jim Morrison, the education manager at DCF. Jim's been the education manager there since early 2020, so he really did start and pretty much immediately jump into the fire. He did work as the education coordinator at the Cambridge office for 3 years, and prior to that, he spent 20 years teaching history and serving as a department chair at several Massachusetts high schools, so he's certainly got the professional background that he brings to this position. He has a Bachelor of Science in History from Northeastern and a Master's in Education from Fitchburg. And again, we would like to welcome him, and we look forward to hearing what he has to say. So I'll pass it off to you, Jim.
So if everyone could hear me, thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I'll just say in advance that there's a potential that I might freeze at some point for whatever reason. Zoom is not kind to me, so if I do freeze, if one of you guys could just kind of let me know that I've frozen. Usually I come back fairly quickly, but I can't really see my Zoom screen right now as I'm doing the presentation. So please let me know. But anyway, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to all of the folks in the SESP program. During my 3 years as education coordinator,
As Jim indicated, there's a potential for him to freeze, so he is currently frozen and he should be back in a few minutes.
Like Megan mentioned, I started my position in January, so it was kind of new to the DCF central office. My position entails a lot of policy work, and so you probably know DCF has its own education policy, so I work to kind of formulate that and tweak that from time to time. I serve as the outlet for DCF to coordinate with legislative bodies, with advocacy groups, with groups like the Federation. And of course, in the 29 area offices, I work with the 29 education coordinators and people in those area offices to make sure that educational stability for all of our students is promoted. And so, you know, that's kind of a Reader's Digest version of my role as education manager. like everyone else, mid-March, the transition to teleworking, remote working, just like remote working for our students, took place, and that's presented a lot of challenges. I am going to start then with an overview in terms of DCF, and I'm just going to assume that there might be some SESPs amongst us who might not be familiar with the structure of DCF and might like a little bit of an overview in terms of how it is in fact structured. My background with DCF was very limited when I wasn't working with them, so I didn't know how it operated. In fact, I'm old enough to remember when DCF was DSS. So there are 29 DCF area offices spread geographically throughout the state. And so each office has its own catchment area that includes various sizes of cities and towns. Some catchment areas are large. For example, the Framingham area office is very big. It has lots of small towns in it, whereas some of the others, like Springfield, might just have Springfield and the Springfield public schools. So it just depends on office to office. Each area office, the top job in each area office is the area director. There are at least 2 area program managers, kind of assistant managers, who report directly to the area director. So those are kind of the top people in each area office. Each area office is broken down into units. There's usually about 5 people in a unit. The units usually are defined pretty clearly. The most common unit is the ongoing unit, but there are other units. Adolescence, adoption, intake kind of speaks for itself. Each unit has a supervisor. The supervisor reports to the area program manager. The tricky thing with DCF is that there is embedded within each area office is a lead agency. Now, the lead agency was something that kind of perplexes a lot of people because they technically aren't DCF employees, but they play a big role in each area office. So the lead agency might be, for example, in Cambridge, it was Riverside Community Care. You might hear JRI, particularly in the South, Key, Wayside. These are all, non-for-profit human service agencies which have a division which is called Family Networks. And so Family Networks, if you hear Family Networks is the lead agency that's embedded into the DCF area office. So each lead agency in each area office has a director, a Family Networks director, 2 to 3 service coordinators who do support and stabilization services through outside agencies for DCF clients, and each office has an education coordinator. Okay, and so the education coordinator is kind of a unique position. The education coordinator is kind of a consultant in each area office, and at the same time, the education coordinator works to make sure that the relationship between the area office and the districts, the school districts in the catchment area, is cohesive. And so the education coordinator reaches out oftentimes to the SPED director, the out-of-district coordinator in a district, and even will touch base with classroom teachers, principals, particular schools, depending on the situation. Okay, so the education coordinator is the key person, and obviously the education coordinator is the key person, along with the caseworker, to coordinate with the SESPs. Okay, so next question: who's the SESP work with at DCF? The caseworker, your client's caseworker, the ongoing caseworker, and with the office's education coordinator. So as an SESP, you should have good communication with obviously the caseworker and with the education coordinator. You should know who that person is, and there should be regular correspondence between them. Now, for those of you guys who are kind of newer SESPs, I would just advise you to kind of keep in mind the way DCF kind of operates is that sorry about that. The way DCF operates is that there's oftentimes a
Hi, Jim. You're frozen. To just let you know, he should be back.
During the top period that they are in fact working, DCF involved. And so that's a challenge. And so,
Jim, I just want to let you know that you froze for a minute there. So if you can just repeat what you.
Sure. Do you know where I was?
It was just a few minutes ago. So the beginning of the conversation you were just having.
Oh, okay, sure. So, yeah, thank you for letting me know. And if I do freeze, please let me know. Usually it comes back pretty quickly. So, yeah, the main thing is in terms of SESPs, who should they work with at DCF? I think it's pretty obvious you would work with the caseworker. You would work with the education coordinator. And it's really incumbent upon those two people to make sure that SESPs are in the loop in terms of all of the meetings, the decisions, best interest discussions, all the things that, you're required to do, obviously IEP meetings, things like that. So there needs to be good communication between the various parties. So, one of the things I would just say to kind of keep in mind in terms of dealing with caseworkers, DCF caseworkers are oftentimes young, oftentimes in their 20s, and oftentimes have limited experience in dealing with special ed students. I just had my experience with working with caseworkers in the Cambridge office. You would have DCF caseworkers who might have known someone who was maybe on an IEP when they were in high school, and that's kind of the extent of their experience after going through their undergraduate program and then starting with DCF. They do get training on education policy, but they get a lot thrown at them when they first start out. So just kind of keep that in mind in terms of like who you might be working with. And that's why we need an education coordinator in every office, and the education coordinator oftentimes will have that experience in terms of dealing with the ESSA law or McKinney-Vento or rules and regulations, and will know the system and will know kind of the way that a school district operates, especially with regards to special education. It's incumbent upon caseworkers and education coordinators to make the SESPs updated, to keep them updated on the status of the cases. One of the things that I would be frustrating for SESPs when I was in Cambridge was that a kid would move and the SESP wouldn't know about it, or a case closed or something along those lines. So really the communication lines really need to be open, and that's one of the things that I'm emphasizing to education coordinators as we move forward. All education related correspondence we need to include the SESPs, especially obviously best interest discussions. Technically there's the best interest discussion takes place between the district and the DCF area office, but SESPs as education decision makers, they need to be involved in that meeting. And so it's very important that DCF offices and education coordinators keep everyone in the loop. And then at the same time, school districts need to be reminded that SESPs need to be kept in the loop in education-related matters. Obviously, they reach out to you when there's an IEP meeting and they need something signed, but they need to be proactive in terms of keeping SESPs updated on the progress of students. Okay, hold on. All right, communication. Real quickly, communication can be difficult given the intense caseload that each DCF worker and the complexities of the schedules of all interested parties. So be patient in terms of communication. At the same time, if you're being ignored and if you're reaching out to the interested parties, particularly the education coordinator or the caseworker, it's the expectation is that they respond to your inquiries in a timely manner. So if that does not happen, the education coordinator does not respond back to you, please contact the lead director, and you can just call up the area office and say, can I talk to the lead director? That's who the education coordinator responds to. Similarly, if the caseworker doesn't respond to you, you can call up the area office and ask to talk to the worker's supervisor, and that person should really be familiar with the case as well. So you might have regular communication with the supervisor anyway. So communication is oftentimes a challenge. All right, so now getting into kind of the heart of the matter in terms of why we're here today. I don't know about folks out there, but we have been, I have not been into my office since March 13th, was the last day I was in. Schools have been closed across the board since the 17th, and with COVID-19, the challenges have been daunting for all of us who are involved in trying to promote educational stability for kids who most need it. For DCF, the circumstances have been particularly challenging. I know that, in this particular discussion, we're going to be talking about mostly, things that are happening in congregate care, but if you can just remove yourself from that situation just for a second, DCF also deals with kids who are in foster care, both in comprehensive foster care and DCF foster homes, and just kids who are in home with their parents or kinship placements. And as a parent of 4, I can tell you the challenges to do remote learning with my 4 kids were pretty vast. I've been a teacher, I'm involved in this stuff. My wife's a kindergarten teacher, so we should be well equipped to do it. For parents who might not have that background, the challenges were vast. So DCF, in addition to the congregate care issues, we've been dealing with a lot of other issues with regards to education during this time period. In response to some of the issues that have popped up really early, on April 10th, DESE's Education Stability Team, which I'm part of, issued a tip sheet that included guidance for those dealing with students in foster care during the COVID-19 crisis. The tip sheet was sent out to all districts on the 10th, and then in the following days was distributed amongst the community who are involved with kids in foster care. If you've not seen it, you could let me know. I think Megan was nice enough to issue a distribution at one point, and hopefully it's out there. If you haven't seen it, please let me know, and I'll make sure that you can get a copy of it. It still stands until further guidance. So the tip sheet included information on enrollment, school of origin, best interest determinations, and connecting with students in foster care. With regards to enrollment, we had a lot of districts that, upon the initial closing of schools, said we were not doing any further enrollments. I believe Worcester Public Schools was one of those, not to call them out, but there were several. And essentially, people said, no, they're guaranteed enrollment under ESSA. And the tip sheet indicates that enrollments need to continue. So regardless of, the circumstances, a district can't say we're not enrolling anyone during this time period. With regards to best interest determinations and best interest discussions that have been taking place, one, the tip sheet clearly indicated that they needed to continue despite the COVID-19 crisis. But also keep in mind that given that remote learning was becoming the norm, that in most cases, kids should remain in their school of origin during the COVID-19 crisis. And then we could revisit, some of the bids that had taken place during COVID after the crisis subsides, whenever that might be. But the emphasis is to keep kids in their school of origin in most cases. And then there was a big section, and I think the SESPs were included in this, in terms of making sure that the districts are connecting with students and with the collaterals of students in foster care. And so the fact of the matter is, oftentimes, the DCF kids, our kids, sometimes get forgotten in times of, crisis. And we wanted to make sure in the tip sheet that schools kept us in mind and kept our students in mind during the time period of COVID-19. And so it makes it real clear that they have a responsibility to continue to communicate with all of us during this time period. Okay. So that was the tip sheet. Hopefully you saw that. One of the things that popped up almost immediately upon this was congregate care. And this is where all of your students basically are. And the question is, could our students who are in congregate care engage in remote learning? I can tell you I was in meetings where it was said with anecdotal evidence that no one's doing anything in congregate care. And that might have been the case in, late March, even early April. And so there was just a big issue that was popping up, at least in the DCF world, about, hey, how do we figure out how well students are engaging in their remote learning plans in congregate care? So what we did was we triggered a congregate care education inquiry. And that was done, it started in late April, early May, and by June we had the results in. At the same time, very grateful to the Federation for doing an SESP survey so that you guys could give some insights into what you were seeing and what you were hearing and what you were experiencing with your students in congregate care. I will tell you that both sets of results have really informed practice, informed discussions at the higher levels of DCF, way beyond my level, going forward. And in fact, like the commissioner of DCF is testifying in front of the legislature at some point today, I think. And she requested the SESP survey results in case she got an education question. So, you know, the fact of it is we are very appreciative of your ability to come forward and share with your experiences with regards to your kids who are in congregate care. So I know you know about the SESP survey. You know, the largest number of kids came up in the somewhat engaged category, if I'm correct. And our survey kind of mirrors that. We used a little different metric, but the inquiry that DCF did was we used our ARC lead team. So I talked about the lead earlier. The ARC is the area resource coordinator in each DCF area office. The ARC deals with a lot of different things. Some are education related, but students who, you know, are in congregate care, they take a particular examination of them, including students who are transitioning from hospitals and TCUs and IRTPs. Nevertheless, the ARCs have deal with all the.
You're frozen for a bit there, James. Again, he should be back in a few minutes.
The students who are in congregate care. It's not a scientific survey by any means.
You froze there again for another minute. You would.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that.
Another moment.
Sure. Want me to? So I think I'll talk about the congregate care inquiry from DCF's perspective. So if you look on the screen, what DCF did was we essentially wanted to empower our ARC and lead teams. The ARC is the area resource coordinator. There's one in each office, and our lead team, who I talked about earlier, to in fact accumulate some information on the experiences, the level of engagement of students who are in congregate care and their experiences with remote learning. So what each team did in each DCF office was they utilized their contacts, in some cases school contacts, in some cases getting feedback from treatment meetings, some cases reaching out to providers themselves, to try to make an assessment on each kid in remote learning, and basically come back and say, hey, was the feedback on this student positive? Was it mixed, or was it negative? You know, are they positively engaging in remote learning? Is it somewhat mixed, or is it negative? Similar metric to what the SESP survey was. Not a scientific survey at all. You know, each team was kind of given some leeway in terms of how they assessed positive, mixed, or negative, but nevertheless, it kind of gave us a snapshot in terms of what was going on in congregate care. And this was the results of the DCF congregate care survey. So you could compare that to the SESP results. Most of the feedback was positive, but we still have, you know, about a quarter of our kids, a little more, who are in the mixed or negative category. And so that is, you know, where we came out. Again, the SESP survey results, very similar. Most of them were kind of in that middle category of somewhat engaged. So, you know, what do we learn from this? What are the takeaways? What are the takeaways from this? Well, the way I look at it is that I think it's really great news that, you know, maybe 3/4 of our kids are engaged in remote learning. But what is it that we do for the other 25% or so maybe up to 1/3, according to the SESP survey. What do we do for those kids? How do we make sure that if there is going to be some degree of remote learning in the fall, that they, in fact, are able to engage to a greater extent than they did from March till June? So one of the things that, the SESP survey did and the DCF inquiry did was identified the problems. And so what are some of the problems that are associated with remote learning? And you guys can see the list. You don't need me to read them to you, and you're all familiar with a lot of these problems with regards to remote learning in congregate care. And so there are all these issues. Now, the one thing I could point to is the staffing issue, is that some of the CARES Act money from the federal government did go to congregate care to help them hire more staff. That doesn't mean the staff that they're hiring or that they're putting on during the day in congregate care facilities is in fact, equipped to help kids with their educational plans. So, necessarily more staff and more money being thrown at the problem doesn't necessarily solve the issue of lack of engagement. In terms of just like looking at this list in general, again, I would say that, I thought districts did a pretty good job as time went on trying to get technology in the hands of students. I know lots of districts had people going out to congregate care facilities to get people laptops and things like that. I think the communication in the beginning was a little weak, and I think that improved as time went on. I think some congregate care facilities were flexible in terms of their rules and regulations, but that was an issue that was ongoing, particularly in a few placements, a few providers. And lack of motivation from students and school refusal, that's something we deal with all the time, whether or not it's a group home or a residential. So that's an ongoing issue. It was probably exacerbated by COVID in some way, shapes, and forms. We did have some quarantines and outbreaks that took place during this time period. I thought the response, at least from DCF's perspective, and a couple of cases was very good, and we were able to move kids, and now we've moved them back. But that's an ongoing problem, and that's obviously going to disrupt students' education. And then, regression and failure to make sufficient progress during this time period. I think for all of our students who are on IEPs, I think you could probably make a case that, for all students, there was a degree of regression as a result of, exclusively doing remote learning. So, how do we deal with this? What are some of the solutions that would come up to combat some of these problems? And like we said, there is this idea that we can increase staffing.
Hi, the recording's frozen again.
Need to communicate, cooperate, collaborate.
We had it, just for a few minutes. I think the last thing you said was we can increase staffing.
Yeah. So I can go back to the previous slide just for a second. Yeah. So I mean, one of the things that we had a issue with were all these problems, and some of it we can increase staffing. There was some money that was associated with the CARES Act that led to staffing being increased, and so that did happen during this time period. It didn't necessarily mean that the staff that was put on in congregate care facilities were greatly equipped to help deal with kids in their educational issues, but at least it put more adults in the congregate care facilities so that they could help kids to the extent that they could with their remote learning programs. So there's no easy answers for all of these problems. We've had a lot of issues during this time period with regards to students who lack motivation, school refusal. That's an ongoing issue, and so consequently, the COVID-19 crisis probably exacerbated that for some students. We did have some outbreaks at some of the congregate care facilities. I thought, honestly, in terms of the ones that I we're familiar with. I thought DCF and DESE and all the collaterals did a pretty good job kind of dealing with that. In one case in particular, we had to move about 22 students from one place to another place and try to minimize the disruption in their education. So in general, I thought that went fairly well, but that's obviously going to be an issue for kids when they're learning. And then the big one obviously is regression and failure to make sufficient progress. I think for COVID-19, every kid, there was a degree of regression because of remote learning. And, for our kids, the kids who are on IEPs, how do we make up for that? How do we deal with that? And so, for all of these problems, there's really no easy answers. I think we need to continue to communicate, continue to cooperate, continue to collaborate, and work with all of the collaterals involved, districts, SESPs, education coordinators, parents, all of the folks who are connected to our students to try and make up, some of these deficits that in fact occurred and try to make the experience better going forward. There is one tangible thing, and then the tangible thing is compensatory services. And so last week, I was part of a panel that talked about compensatory services and DESE. It was a DESE-sponsored panel. And they're using the term not in the traditional, I know there's a lot of lawyers out there, not in the traditional BSEA hearing wording of compensatory services. The term compensatory services for this particular time period is to mean any services that a student with an IEP requires to make up for the impact on a student of the interruptions caused by temporary school closures and suspension of in-person instruction related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so DESE will drop a guidance in mid-July on compensatory services. I think it's really important for all of us to kind of take a look at that guidance. I've kind of seen a sneak preview of the guidance. It includes, some key questions. It includes clarification of the particular services the student might need. It includes, interesting, I didn't think of this as this was happening, students who were getting services and then turned 22 during COVID-19, do they still get services for the time that they missed, even though they're out of kind of that age range? And then a step-by-step process for determining compensatory services. These are all things that are being worked on by DESE, and it's scheduled to drop mid-July. So I would encourage folks to kind of be on the lookout for that. I'll certainly, forward that to Megan when I do see it drop. In terms of the guidance, I think, guidance is, some are really great, some aren't so great. I think this one, when you do read it, I think it is pretty useful, and it's well done, and it brings up a lot of issues. And one of the things that brings up the kids who because of COVID-19 need added mental health services, as a result of engaging in this. So these are all things that are included in that, and I think I would encourage people to kind of take a look at that, and I'll help alert people when that does drop. Let me go back. So ESY in summer school, traditionally that starts right after this 4th of July holiday. ESY services, they are being provided this summer by districts, as is, they're legally entitled for kids on an IEP who have that on their IEP. Summer school depends on the district. So I know some districts have greatly scaled back their summer school because of budgetary concerns, credit recovery, things along those lines. So the majority of both extended school year and summer school, they're going to be done remotely. And that was part of the guidance that dropped on June 4th. The guidance includes many safety and health protocols. That is when everyone kind of looked at the 10 in a class, required face masks, students 6 feet apart, and a lot of
Jim, I don't know if you can hear me, but you're frozen.
those guidelines still.
Jim?
Yep.
Sorry, you froze again. Do you mind rewinding about a minute or so?
No, not at all.
All right.
Was I on ESY in summer school?
Yes. Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right after the talking about face masks, you froze up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Sure, no problem. So yeah, so the one thing that I was emphasizing, and I apologize for all these delays, but I think that's the world we're working in. So just imagine our poor students having to deal with this. The big thing for summer school and ESY was the guidelines that dropped on June 4th. Those are the ones that included the face masks being required, students being 6 feet apart, no more than 10 in a class cohort. Everyone assumed that was going to be the situation for the fall, and really that initial guidance was just for summer school and ESY. But the point being is that most ESY services are going to be done remotely. Summer school is pretty much going to be exclusively done remotely. However, if you read that guidance closely that dropped on June 4th, students who are considered high priority will be eligible for in-school ESY services. Now, interestingly enough, how do you determine someone who's high priority? So my next slide just kind of just did a quick copy and paste job from the guidance. Students who receive multiple services in the summer, such as applied behavioral analysis, speech, occupational, and/or physical therapies, and academic instruction, so that at least some of those services can be offered in person, that'd be high priority. The next one, I think pretty much everyone, but students who will need time to learn new procedures and protocols to increase their successful reentry to school in the fall. So if a district deems a student high priority, you might find that they are at least offering some type of in-person, in-school learning for ESY this summer, if they deem them to fall under those categories. The advice that I would say is that ESY services and summer school traditionally start right after July 4th. I have one student who's getting some ESY services, and they're starting right, I think the 7th maybe. And we had a meeting with the teachers the other day. So all EDMs need to figure out what services are being offered to their students, and they need to work to ensure that those services are maximized, so that the idea that kids who are entitled to these through their IEP get them. And again, this isn't compensatory. This isn't to make up for what they missed during the regular school year. This is something that they need as a result of their IEP. Okay, so let's work together to make sure that ESY is continued for those who are entitled to it. Okay, so fall, and this is this is the kind of the big one. This is the one that dropped last Thursday. I was getting nervous because they were saying for about 2 weeks, oh, it's going to drop, it's going to drop, it's going to drop, and then finally they dropped it last Thursday. I think you're probably all familiar with it. Each district has to do parent survey, self-study, and feasibility plan, and present 3 options to DESE for the fall. And they have to have 3 plans: one with just in person, one that's hybrid, and one that's remote. And the districts will submit their 3 plans. I've heard August 7th, but the guidance just said August. And so my question was, and I asked this of the DESE folks after this dropped, I have a meeting with them every Friday, was, okay, a district submits its 3 plans. Who decides, which one they're going to go with? And the answer was that districts, as was the case previously, they're going to have the ability to determine for themselves. So if a district is comfortable with its in-person learning plan, and DESE says the plan's okay, then the district can go with that. Similarly for hybrid, and similarly for remote learning. If a district says, hey, we don't want to have any in-person school, as of now, they can choose that option. Interestingly enough, some districts, I think, jumped the gun a little bit, and they announced what they were doing prior to this guidance coming out. And I think they did that not knowing that they'd have to do the survey and do the self-study, feasibility study, present the plans. But nevertheless, districts are required to, in fact, put their plans on their websites and make sure that they're available to the public. So one of the things before we get into like additional guidances that are forthcoming from DESE, we regularly communicate in terms of in terms of people in the districts, ed coordinators, SESPs, SPED directors, out-of-district coordinators, classroom teachers, principals in some cases, assistant principals. If you read the guidelines that dropped last Thursday on the 25th, each district now also has to have a COVID-19 response leader for the district, and then each individual school has to have a COVID-19 response leader. You can look at it one of two ways. They're adding another layer of people that we need to deal with, or two, it's good that someone is a point person for COVID. I anticipate that going forward, DCF and the SESP program are going to have to deal with that specific COVID-19 response leader. And right now we are trying to formulate some meetings that might take place in late July, early August, so all the principals involved with kids in foster care can have meetings with the key people in each district. And so that's a major task that I'm working on. When those meetings are finalized, I will certainly make it available that the SESPs will have the option of joining those as well. All right, so what the guidance didn't include, if you look at it, nothing on transportation, nothing on kids in foster care, but that was kind of to be expected. Nothing on transportation, nothing on extracurricular activities, athletics. How does the school handle positive cases? What about remote learning resources? What about resources in general in terms of schools and trying to, have appropriate staff for in-person learning during this time period? What about special education? These guidances are all coming in July. And so we just need to be cognizant of the fact that they're going to drop and we need to be alerted to them. And so obviously the transportation and the special education ones are most important to us, but nevertheless, the other ones I think we should be aware of as well. So those they're working on those right now, and those are going to drop at some point in July. So please be kind of aware of that going forward. And, again, this is where we need those open communications in terms of how to deal with all of this. If you look at the guidance, and this is kind of, I'll wrap up with this. If you look at the guidance that dropped last Thursday, it tasks school districts to develop and begin implementing this summer a plan for communicating more intensively with students, family, staff, and the community. I would argue that, we need to be part of that. We are part of the community. We are important collaterals in terms of the kids in foster care. In some cases, we're the only ones really sticking up for kids who are in kind of dire circumstances in terms of their educational performance and ability. So we need to make sure that we're sitting at the table when districts start communicating their plans for the fall. And so I would just encourage all of us to kind of work together to make sure that we are part of this plan and we are included on all the details going forward. And so I will wrap up with that. I have a few key links at the end here. I'm sure you're aware of most of them. Anytime something COVID related drops, DESE has a special COVID-19 page. So I'm checking that constantly to see if anything new is up. During the initial guidance on special education, there was a great frequently asked questions section. So I've included that as well. I've included the DESE Educational Stability Team website, which I'm part of. Even though I work for DCF, I'm part of the DESE team. And that's a good one to check on as well. And then just in general, sometimes it's very confusing which cities and towns fall in which DC area office catchment area. So I've included that as well. So, I don't know what time it is, but I'd be happy to take any questions going forward. I don't know if I'll have great answers for you, but nevertheless, it'd be great to take a look at some questions. I see some of the chat. It's nice to be back on the regular screen here. So that's pretty much it.
You can stop sharing your screen now that your presentation is done. And people would have received the handout, so that list of resources on the last page is available. But if anybody has questions, please submit them now. There was a lot of information. I know we have a couple of our support specialists that are on, so perhaps you can submit questions, frequently asked questions that you're hearing out there that we can now have Jim answer for us. So please submit them, or make it if you can think of any questions. I will submit one that we hear of, and we kind of talked a little bit about this, and that was for students that are receiving a remote learning within the group settings, who provides that oversight, ensuring that their work is being completed and being submitted in lieu of parents doing that?
Great question. I mean, and that's one of the ones that we've been discussing at DCF with our Congregate.
Oops, looks like Jim's frozen for a moment here, but again,
oh, he knows it.
Let's make sure that we're catching any questions that are coming in.
I'm back. Yeah, that's a great question, Renee. And then I think the answer, unfortunately, early on, was what everyone feared, and the answer was like no one. And it's a big undertaking to coordinate just one student's remote learning plan and make sure that they're situated to be able to access their classes, their assignments, the directions. And I think slowly as time went on, we had some communication with congregate care providers that, hey, they need to really help us with that. And so the idea that some of the CARES Act money was freed up in order to do that. We also were able to free up some money from DCF to help provide technology to kids who were in congregate care through DCF. It wasn't education related, but the whole notion that, when a kid's in a residential school, I think for the most part, they were okay. They had their own issues, particularly with outbreaks, but kids in group homes, who's responsible? And there's no direct guidance on that, but it needs to be a team effort. And DCF, I think, as time went on, was better at pressing the providers to make sure that kids at least were accessing. They might not have someone who would be able to help solve quadratic equations, on staff, but at least the idea that they're getting kids, accessing and engaging to the extent that they could. So yeah, very difficult. One of the major challenges.
Okay, we do have a question. In the fall, will group homes be staffed and accommodated to various district choices for hybrid and remote learning?
Well, that's going to be a challenge because the districts aren't going to make their determinations until August. So, the congregate care facilities then would have to kind of adjust based on, what the districts are doing. The problem is, let's take a group home that has 20 kids in it. It might have kids with 20 different plans, because you might, have 3 kids from a particular district who, are doing a hybrid model. You might have 5 kids from districts who are doing like in-person learning, and then you might have the rest might be exclusively remote. So it's going to be difficult for congregate care providers to kind of adjust that quickly. I think the best at this point, the best we could hope for is that there is increased staff to help deal with those kids who are going to be doing some degree of remote learning. And I think there will be, but in terms of having the flexibility to adjust, I think that's a tough ask at this point.
Jim, we had a question come in on best interest determination meetings, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about not only who holds those, but also who might be invited, just really quickly about when they might be held, and also if there's any special considerations that DCF has taken into account with those meetings under the current circumstances with COVID, remote learning, student placements really being, as kind of up in the air as they are right now.
Yeah, so the April 10th guideline said they need to continue. Mm-hmm. Two, one of the big misconceptions about best interest discussions, determinations, is that you have to have everyone like together and everyone has to talk. On cases where it's going to be contentious, absolutely, yeah, get everyone on speakerphone so that you can, have those intense discussions. On ones where it's fairly easy, where there's going to be an agreement, you can have a best interest determination over email. And, I was just helping an ed coordinator kind of facilitate one of those. As long as you make sure that all the participants are in agreement and are coordinated with and make sure that they're engaged. But some of those can take place fairly quickly if it's an easy one. Right now, best interest determinations, the idea is that because of the remote learning, kids, unless they're like some
Oh, you froze up, Jim. He should come back soon.
I'm back.
You're back.
Yeah, unless there's extenuating circumstances, the guidance has been kids should remain in their school of origin, but also with the caveat that those can be revisited at a later date after all of this kind of passes. So sometimes we made the decision, hey, we're going to stick with school of origin because everyone's doing remote learning anyway. But when this all kind of shakes out, maybe local enrollment might be better. So that I think still stands for now until we get a better handle in terms of what is going on in the fall. In terms of just general best interest discussions, they can't happen unless the foster care point of contact for the district and the foster care point of contact or that person's designee for DCF are in attendance. Those two individuals have to be there. Okay, the education coordinator necessarily doesn't have to be there, but the education coordinator oftentimes is the person who sets it up and facilitates and gets everyone's schedule coordinated so that everyone can participate. Oftentimes the SPED director will be at them. Oftentimes the out-of-district coordinator from the district will be at them. Oftentimes will be representatives from the school of origin, but also they need to have the potential new school, where local enrollment might take place. Representatives from that school should be at it. So it should be a fairly big meeting when there are issues to discuss. All those people should be there, and I would argue that the SESP needs to be there as well. Although it's not technically an education meeting, the SESP has done a lot of legwork in terms of these kids' educations, and they know the backgrounds, they know the IEPs. They should be there and have their voice heard. So it's dependent on the type of meeting. If it's an easy one, if your kid coming out of a placement, coming out of home and going to a STAR, and everyone agrees he's not going to enroll locally in a 45-day placement, it's going to be school of origin. You can do that via email. But as we know, usually things aren't that easy. When it does get complicated and we need, to hear everyone's voices through like a speakerphone, it's really important that everyone gets invited and participates.
So Jim, I know you spoke a little bit about this in your presentation, but one of the questions is, do you expect the upcoming guidance for the new school year to include high priority students' access to in-school services?
Yeah, and I think that was in the guidance as well. And I think that overall, if you read the guidance, like the point, the overall tone was, hey, you're developing these 3 plans, but let's really concentrate on getting kids back in school. That was like the overall tone of the guidance. And similarly, for kids who need that because of their needs, need those in-person services, the guidance actually said that the districts need to create a way that those services can take place for those high priority students, that they need to take place in person. And so that's something that, the districts need to be in consideration when they're formulating their plans for the fall. The guidance was pretty clear on that, in saying those high priority students, there needs to be some kind of planning, and how you do that structurally in terms of moving your school around and your personnel around. I think that's a great question, and I think it's an important point, that regardless of what a district chooses, DESE has said, and they'll be coming out with their special ed guidance, at some point in July. DESE did indicate that those kids need to have in-person services regardless of what the plan is, and they need to make that happen. So great question. Thank you for bringing that up.
Jim, this is one that came through the chat, and the question was, how do we find out, or how long should we wait for an answer about students aging out during this time? They have lost time that was not under their control. So it sounds like you expect that to come out with the guidance that,
they said
should be released mid-July?
Mid-July, yeah. That's a tough one. I mean, for those kids who turn 22 during all of this, and I'm anticipating that there's going to be something to help those kids out in terms of continuing beyond 22, but I just can't,
Looks like you're frozen again.
Frozen us again.
Yep.
Hopefully we get you back soon.
Right.
Yeah. In the meantime,
continue to send your questions. We see a few more that are listed in here.
I see one about technology, another one about best interest meeting.
Yep.
I'm back.
Oh,
okay, great.
I like Lynn Adams. It's important to remember that the bid is not an IEP meeting, and that is true. So Lynn's one of our top ed coordinators.
Okay, let's see.
Try to keep them all these questions straight.
Right.
Rennie, you got the next one?
So I think this is a question that was aging out. We have that one already. Did you see another one? Oh, there's one around technology. So some districts, technology is only provided to kids 2nd grade and up. How would this impact the younger kids in group homes to get an education?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, unfortunately, technology is district to district. I think there was like this misconception out there when this first happened that the state was just going to provide everyone with laptops, and it just, it doesn't work that way. There were some districts that, weren't providing technology to kids in out of district placements because they thought that those schools should do that. So yeah, I mean, that's a challenge. I wish I had a better response to say, hey, we can guarantee that kids at this point who are younger are going to have access to it. I think in addition to access, just the ability to have someone there to help them utilize it, I think is important as well. But I don't have an answer to that in terms of whether or not that's going to be guaranteed. It's just going to depend on district to district. I will say some of the latency programs that kids are in do have some good technology, at least the ones that I'm familiar with. So I'm hoping that will help. And again, I think DCF has really done a good job in terms of stepping up and identifying those families that need technology, and through various money that has come available, gotten that technology to those parents. And that's for things like treatment meetings and regular visitations and check-ins and things along those lines. So I'm hoping by the fall, we're able to cover everyone, because there will be some districts that, if the plan goes as forward, there will be some districts that will be doing less remote learning than they are now. So you would hope that technology would open up.
And I did see a question come in that I can actually address it, and it's from Sandra, and it says, I don't think that there is anything in my SASP booklet about BID meetings, perhaps add it. BID meetings they're not brand new, but they are fairly recent, and the handbook was written before they actually became part of the process under ESSA. So it is something that we're going to be adding when we do eventually revamp the handbook. It's in some of our other handouts, you know, the frequently asked questions that we send out sometimes, things like that. So, but yes, that is a great point. It will be getting added. And there's another question that came in from Teresa. And Jim, maybe you can speak to this, because to be honest, I'm not sure. Trade schools are a bit different in regulations. Do you have any updates? What do you think about that?
I don't know anything about that. I think that's probably one of the guidances will drop in July in terms of trade schools. I didn't see anything in the guidance that was on the 25th with regards to trade schools. The challenge for trade schools is that they already do a degree of remote learning in that they're in school for 1 week, half the population, and then the other half is out, you know, working their trade, and then they flip it, particularly the high schools. And so, you know, I imagine the challenges for them are pretty great. So I would hope that that's addressed in one of the guidances in July.
I think if we looked at websites like the Association for Trade Schools or Trade School Superintendents of Vocational Schools, they probably have some updates on there. But that's a good question, because I
would think so. It is a good question.
To go there, yeah. Okay.
And I think one thing that to remember is that, you know, the district in July is going to come out with some guidance, and schools are going to provide their recommendation, but they are guidance. They're not mandates. So there's a chance that different schools what they're going to do is going to look differently. And so that it's important to know that this could be district by district, what a school is providing and how that looks, whether they choose to do remote learning or hybrid or whatever their option might be. That there's a chance that oops, it sounds like I have an echo here, but there's a lot of different options that schools are going to be providing. So it is important to recognize that, you know, this is guidance and it's best practices, but it's not regulations that are coming out.
That's a great point. And that, you know, there were so many like variables that you can just look at, you know, going forward, and things that we're going to have to deal with. And so, you know, I was in a meeting the other day, one of the DCF folks said, will schools who have to formulate plans, will they have some degree of flexibility even within their own district? So for example, could they choose that an elementary school, you know, where they have sufficient space, be in person, but a high school where they don't have to do like a hybrid model? And to me, that would probably fall under the hybrid umbrella that DESE set up anyway. But in terms of that particular question, I don't know. You know, I think these are all things that kind of need to be worked out. And, you know, I feel for poor parents who are trying to make plans, you know, that involve, you know, really kind of life situations in terms of work schedules and childcare and things along those lines. You know, it's all incumbent upon whatever their district, you know, decides in August. And so everyone's going to be kind of in scramble mode. And that's, I kind of pointed to this in one of the discussions going forward. That's why I would like to have some meetings in place between DCF and school districts, so that when this does drop, we can immediately get all the folks together who are going to be like implementing whatever the policy is, so that at least they'll know each other and would be able to coordinate things. And, you know, obviously the education coordinators would be part of that. I'd, you know, love the SESPs to be part of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you, Jim. And I think, you know, as you alluded to, you know, patience and flexibility and communication really, you know, do continue to be, you know, the key words of this time. as people move forward, both on districts, DCF, SESPs, parents, everyone is, it's a big thing to react to. Everyone's trying to figure it out as we go along, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought one of the more interesting things at the press conference was when Mr. Riley, the Commissioner of Education, was asked, "Hey, what do you say when, regardless of what plan is picked, when a parent says I'm not comfortable sending, my student to school?" And he didn't really have a response to that. And I didn't expect him to, but that's a question. And you could extend it out. What do you say when a congregate care facility, a group home, says, "Hey, we're not comfortable sending all our kids out to do in-person learning and then come back to our group home, in the afternoon." And our priority is making sure the fact that kids are safe and healthy, and by having some in-person learning, we might not be able to guarantee that. The one thing I would say in the guidance is that, man, they did their research in terms of like backing up that, schools, the safety risks for school age kids are a lot less than everyone else. And like, that's,
Right.
I'm not great at like reading all of these studies, but it seemed like, especially in the appendix, it seemed like they had their ducks in a row because they kind of anticipated that there would be some pushback on the safety. And they had studies from all over the place saying, in-person learning, it doesn't affect the school age population as much. For those of you really into that makes for an interesting read.
I would say along that lines, one of the things within the guidance, it does say ultimately the decision whether or not to send your student, whether they're going to attend in-person instruction or remote instruction, lies on the parent. So that's included under the section for recognizing the special role of families, so that parents ultimately have the decision making whether they're going to send their kids or not. So that being the case, then who do you think will ultimately have that decision making when it comes to kids that are in the congregate care setting? You mentioned that the group home may feel we're not comfortable doing that. So who would ultimately have that?
Yeah, and from what I've heard just from talking to people at DESE is that they're going to give DCF a lot of flexibility in ultimately making that decision, and they'll have to talk to the people in the congregate care facilities. They're going to have, not so much for SESP.
Yep. Frozen a bit.
Hey, Jimmy, frozen us again.
One thing I will say while we're waiting for Jim to come back is there's a lot of comments here about the best interest determination, and as Megan mentioned that that's something that she will additionally add to the resource. But we do discuss that in our orientation training. Because there's so many comments, we'll get more information about that and make sure that that's on our website, on our resource page, so that that you have information, since it's clear that there's an interest around that area.
Thanks for that. I know there's been some spreadsheets or some handouts that DCF has put out on that as well. So I don't know if you have those, we can certainly get together and share those. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to bring up too, and I think you could also take what Jim was talking about, with group homes and parents being nervous to send their students to school, is that, alternatively, districts might have some students that they're really concerned about not going to school. So instead of, if they do have a hybrid model, maybe there's some students that the district or the team, or a team meaning providers, not necessarily special ed team, can talk about, is it safe? Is it a good idea for those kids to go back 5 days a week?
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's because they don't have a safe home environment, maybe they wouldn't be engaged as much otherwise, and the district doesn't want to lose them altogether. So there's lots to talk about.
Right.
Yeah, every case is different.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So just before you froze, Jim, you were talking about the decision making around whether students would attend remotely or not. Yeah.
The indication I'm getting from the folks at DESE is that DCF, and as someone who has guardianship of the students, they're going to have a lot of say as to whether or not the students attend school, just like a parent would in that particular case. And DCF's going to have to reach out, I think, and this is going to be a big process. They're going to have to reach out for all the kids that they have custody of on a case-by-case basis with, you know, the congregate care facilities, foster parents, comprehensive foster parents, kinship placements, in all these cases, and find out whether or not they're comfortable, you know, having their students attend some in-person learning. So there's just so much that's going to have to go on in a pretty quick period of time,
Right.
you know, in August. And so, you know, the thing that I'm most, you know, apprehensive about is that everyone just kind of like freaks out in August when the decision by all the districts are, you know, made public, and everyone's just going to be kind of in scramble mode. So I think we all need to kind of keep a level head and make sure that we're reaching out and talking to the right people who are connected with our students, so that a good decision is made.
Absolutely. So I don't see any additional questions coming through. So I will take the opportunity to thank you again, James, for coming on. This has been extremely valuable information, and we appreciate this collaboration. And because things are moving so often, and you know, week to week, we're still waiting for additional guidance, and we don't know what happened. That maybe we can do a few of these, and you know, we can come and kind of talk about what's going on and what we can do, and our understanding of the guidance and how it impacts these students. And also thank you, Megan, for joining us. We appreciate the partnership and collaboration.
Yeah, as usual. Yeah, no problem. I appreciate it.
So there's other questions, and unless either of you have closing remarks that you'd like to provide.
No, I mean, thank you for the opportunity. I can't tell you enough how much it means to me.
Oops.
That's fitting.
Well, unless you have some, Megan, while we're waiting for Jim to come back.
No, I mean, you know, of course, I want to thank, you know, continue to thank all the providers that are attending today, all the providers in general, and especially all the special ed surrogate parents. I know sometimes this can be a very difficult, very isolated role, and you know, there's a lot of work going on there right now, and we just, you know, on behalf of Renee and I would like to thank everyone for doing that. These are very convoluted, and I hate to overuse the word unprecedented, but here we are, times. And the fact that we still have so much engagement and work on behalf of these kids is really a testament, I think, to the dedication of our volunteers. So thank you. Yeah. And, you know, I know Renee's available. I'm available. When Jim comes back, he can, he's back. So I know he's available to answer any questions that people have. If you think of it, you know, 5 minutes after you click, you know, leave meeting, which I know I always do, feel free to email or call. Yeah, we're happy to help. Yeah,
same with me. And then you guys can reach out to me directly, or through the Ed Stability page. My email's on there, or just through Megan, you know, because we're talking constantly about all the issues that come up. And like I said, I can't thank everyone enough for the work that you're doing with this particular population. I mean, they really depend on your, you know, efforts and talents. So thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And I do want to remind everyone that this webinar was recorded. It will be on our archive webinar page along with all of our previous webinars. So please visit that as a resource, and also that you'll receive a survey after the webinar. And you know, your feedback is important to us. Let us know additional topics you'd like to hear us present, and any other feedback that you'd like to provide. We really take a good look at that, and it's important to us. So thank you both for joining us again, and thank you to all of our volunteers. Have a great, safe week.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.